Hello guys, welcome back to another part in the Mini Cooper S engine rebuild. Before we get into things, make sure you give this video a like. It really does help me out and it shows your appreciation. Now then, what is the plan for this video? So the engine itself is pretty much fully rebuilt now. All the ancillaries are back on it, of course, apart from the drive belt, which hopefully should be turning up and we can get that installed before this goes in the car, because I think it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to install this before it is in the engine bay. It's just going to be, yeah, so much easier. We're just going to have so much room to install the belt and to put the tension onto the belt as well. Now, that is pretty much it for the engine. You know, the wiring loom, all that has been cleaned and all the rest of it, that is pretty much ready to go back on. But we pretty much need to get the gearbox ready to go back onto the engine as well. So essentially it is just a bunch of different seals and bushes and things like that. So we have the input shaft seal that sits inside of here. As you can see, the old one is already removed. Then we have the output shaft seals, or the drive shaft seals, whatever you want to call them. They obviously sit on the diff housing. Again, the old ones have both already been removed. What else do we have? Now we have a new what's called a guide bush. It's essentially just this thing right here. Of course, bolts for that. We have a new fill and drain plug. I believe we also have a new clutch fork and pin as well. Gearbox mount insert. This is from Powerflex. I believe it just drops into the original gearbox mount. That should be very easy to install. Now, of course, we need to get some gearbox oil into the thing as well, but I think I'll more than likely do that once the gearbox is in the car, so it's, you know, at the proper level. Believe, yeah, there should be a drain plug down the bottom there, then a fill plug there. I believe you just fill it up until you have a steady stream of fluid from the fill plug. Now, I know what many of you are thinking, how the hell does he afford to do these crazy projects? Now, truth be told, it would not be possible without the help of sponsors. Now, this video is sponsored by Omaze. Now, Omaze are giving UK residents aged 18 and over the chance to win 2 minis, the first of which is a Mini Electric in red. Now, the Mini Electric is a great car for local commuting. It is the perfect car for driving in cities. The second car then is a Mini Clubman John Cooper Works in black. Now, this is something pretty special. Not only does it have the sound and the performance to go with it, but it also is a very practical daily driver as well. To be in with a chance of winning both of these cars, you need to enter by midnight on Valentine's Day. Guys, that is the 14th of February. Do not forget. Now, all you need to do to enter is click that link down in the description box below. And while you're there, feel free to check out some of the other prizes that Omaze has to offer, like a £3 million London house and 100 grand in cash to help you settle in. Now, once again, I want to say a massive thanks to the guys over at Omaze for sponsoring this video. But now let's get back to the mini rebuild. I guess first thing is first, we'll get the new input shaft seal installed onto the gearbox. So it should just slide over the shaft there, and we just need to knock it in place. Just going to lube it up with some gear oil, which smells absolutely delightful. And yeah, just slide it over the shaft. Need to make sure this goes in square. So I do have a made up tool here, just a long tube of aluminium. Let's give this a few taps. Case of tapping it in all the way now. it should just come to a complete stop. Yeah, that's got to be it. Seems nice and uniform. Let's retrieve our tool. There we are then. That's the new input shaft seal now installed. Seated home all the way and looking nice and uniform all the way around. Next then, the guide bush can go on. I don't really know why it's called a bush. It's more of a sleeve, you could say. But that should just push over into place. And it's just a case of installing the two, I believe, E8 screws. Yep, E8. I'll just get these tightened down. Next then we have the pressure pin for the clutch fork. Just put a tiny amount of grease on the end there. I'm going to have to tap this into place. There we are. Nice and easy to install. Just use a deep socket to knock that in. Next we have the clutch fork itself. Now pretty much everything else that I am replacing on this gearbox is optional, but when it comes to the clutch fork I would recommend you replace this because it is known for these to snap, which obviously it's a pretty big job just to replace this. You're going to want to replace a clutch and flywheel at the same time anyway, so yeah, whenever you have the gearbox off, just replace this. It's not a very expensive part, genuine from BMW. Just a tiny bit of grease on the pin there. Fork itself should just push onto that pressure pin. There we are. Easy peasy. Now we can move on to the output shaft seals. So again, two new genuine BMW seals. Again, just a smearing of this nice smelling gear oil. And again, I have a custom made tool. You could just use a socket if you can find one big enough, but you only want to tap on the blue area. You don't want to push on that brown area there because you'll end up crushing the seal. Again, need to try and keep it square. There we go then. Once installed, should look something a little like this. Just got to do the same for the other side now. There we go, that's the other side installed as well. I'll just get the fill and drain plug swapped out now as well. Bit of a strange one with these, they actually don't have any kind of seal or washer on them. You would expect they would, but yeah, I have checked with BMW and they do not. This is how the new ones come. And obviously I'm not going to torque down the fill plug because we still have to add fluid to this thing, but I'm going to torque down the drain plug to 43 Newton meters. There we are. I'm going to get the gearbox mount insert installed, the Powerflex one. Like I said, this should be very simple and easy to do. That's what it looks like. Basically just takes up any slack in the original mount. I mean, these mounts don't really wear anyway, but you know, for fast road use or for even track use, it's a good idea to do these small little upgrades. They do make a big difference when done all together. I have also upgraded the engine mount on the car as well. We are, like I said, nice and simple. I think that's about as far as I'm going to go with the gearbox for now. I do also have a new clutch slave cylinder to go on. Genuine Sachs. But I think I'll install that once the gearbox is attached to the engine, because it is kind of underneath, and yeah, it could be very easy to snap this thing. So yeah, I'll move on to the engine side of things now. So then, managed to get a new drive belt. Went with a Gates drive belt. I couldn't get the OEM Dayco belt, but Gates is just as good. I use this on, you know, pretty much all my other cars. So yeah, let's hope this one fits. All seems to be lined up in the pulleys. Can now just use a 30mm spanner and just put the tension on the belt. There we go. Hasn't moved anywhere. Yep, looking good for that. May as well also put the tension on the friction wheel as well. Just pull this tab out and kind of let it do its thing. There we are, it should be engaged. Okay, so I've been a bit busy and I've got a few other things done on the engine. Mainly the fact that I have now pretty much fully installed the wiring harness, the entire wiring loom. So as you can see at the top here, the ignition coils, they're all plugged in. We have this cable down here. I think that's for the, that's actually for the O2 sensor from the exhaust. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, that's still obviously to go back in, but we have to wait for the heat shields to go on. I'll probably do that once the engine is back in the car. But here, these two connectors, these go to the ECU. We have this one, which is Rogue, but I believe again that's for an O2 sensor. I believe that's for that, so I'll probably plug that in once it's back in the car. But then pretty much everything else is now plugged back in. Secondary water pump, the turbo there. We have the oil pressure sensor, coolant temperature sensor, the camshaft position sensor, high pressure fuel pump, the thermostat just there. Coming around the back, on top of the intake manifold, we have the map sensor, and then underneath, of course, we have all the injectors, all 4 injectors, the rail pressure sensor in the middle there. Now, of course, we have all of the vacuum lines. We have a vacuum controller there. And then there is this thing as well. Not entirely sure what that is. Then, of course, we have the throttle body that's plugged back in. All the wiring, I believe, is in the correct position. It is a bit of a spider's nest under there, but yeah, everything is routed as it should be. And yeah, it definitely is, you know, much easier doing this when the engine is outside of the car. I would hate to try and plug all this back in with the engine inside of the car. But yeah, we're looking good. Of course, we have the Vanos solenoid that's plugged back in. I already mentioned the map sensor. I believe this goes to... Actually, I'm not entirely sure what this goes to. I'm sure it goes to something though, so I guess we'll wait and find out. Oh, that might go to the... Is this the MAF sensor, possibly? There's a pipe that comes down here. I believe that plugs in there. Oh, we also have the crankcase breather hose. I haven't actually sent it home yet though, so I'll just plug this in. Yeah, that's that end plugged in as well. I actually plan on installing an oil catch can for this engine, which means this pipe will be pretty much redundant. I'll more than likely install a blanking plug on the intake manifold here, and then this end here from the rocker cover, that'll actually go to a catch can, a 3-port oil catch can, because we have one... oh, sorry, just there actually. Obviously we have crankcase vapors coming from here and from here, but I'm going to channel that all the way to an oil catch can, and it means we haven't got no oil then going back through our intake. But yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, we've also I've just cable tied up the vacuum lines. The longer one of the two goes to the turbo actuator. Then there is a shorter one here which goes to the vacuum pump, but it's actually missing the end. That was actually, it kept sliding off, so I'm just going to swap that over for a bit of silicone hose, and that will slot on the vacuum pump nipple just there. I also installed the clutch release or throwout bearing as well. That literally just pushes into the clutch fork here, has like a couple of clips either side, and obviously you want to make sure that the bearing itself is nice and greased on the inside, and then the guide bush as well, that's nice and greased. I just used some of this Castrol high temperature grease, seems to do the job quite well. I've used it a bunch of times now, and yeah, it's never let me down. So yeah, you want to make sure the spline is also nice and greased, but I'll do that once we get the gearbox mated up with the engine. Also have a new front cover here that just goes over the wiring for the ignition coils. I believe the old one actually melted at the front here somewhere, so we'll get this clipped in as well. One click, two clicks, finishes it off quite nicely. That I think I need to get the engine off of the engine stand, get it on the hoist so we can get the flywheel and clutch installed next. So as you can see, the engine is now on the engine hoist. It's just resting on this work table here. Don't worry, the weight is not on the sump. You know, it's still able to move, but it's just, you know, resting just so it's just going to be a little bit easier to install the flywheel and clutch. I have made sure that the crankshaft position sensor is in place. Just there, I've screwed the small torque screw down. Next thing I need to do is torque down these two plugs here. These are the plugs for the oil galleries. Obviously you want to remove them when it comes to cleaning the block, and you want to replace the seals as well. If you're wondering what the seals look like, it is these things here. I think they're just steel with a rubber inner ring, you could say. But yeah, obviously you want to replace them, and then these need to be torqued down to 35 Newton meters. There we are. It's really not that tight at all with a big torque wrench. There we are. Next then we can install this ring here. This is for the camshaft position sensor. If you forget to install this, your engine isn't starting, so yeah, do not forget to install this before the flywheel. Give it a good clean up, and I guess it can only go on one way, as it has to line up with the dowel, of course. I guess like that. That's on now. Next then is the flywheel, genuine Sachs flywheel. In theory you can reuse the flywheel, but with it being a dual mass flywheel, they do wear, and mine actually had quite a few heat spots on it as well. So, you know, we're going the whole way with this build, so we may as well just replace the flywheel with the entire clutch kit as well. This should have some kind of coating on it from factory, so I'm just going to give it a bit of a clean off with some brake cleaner. Okay then, flywheel is now nice and clean, free of any oils, so it should just be a case of dropping this into position. Need to get ready with our new bolts as well. Now if you order a Sachs flywheel, which is the genuine one, it will come with new bolts. They should also come with thread locker on them as well, which if you are replacing the flywheel, the bolts also need to be replaced, so just bear that in mind. Of course, just line up the dowel on the back. That should be lined up. Install our new bolts. When it comes to torquing down these bolts, they have a sequence. So first stage is 8 Newton meters, all the bolts. Second stage is 30 Newton meters, all of the bolts, and then an additional 90 degrees. So we'll do the 8 Newton meters first. Oh, and we may or may not have to put the crankshaft locking pin in. We'll just wait and see, I suppose. First 8 Newton meters should be fine though. There we are. Of course, this goes in a crisscross pattern. While you're tightening wheel bolts. So I have decided to install the crankshaft locking pin because it may be fine to do the next stage, which is 30 Newton meters, but I know for sure when I go to do the 90-degree rotation, it's just going to want to move and then it will end up throwing me off. So yeah, let's do the next stage anyway. 30 Newton meters. That's 1. 2, 6. Now when it comes to doing the angle portion of the torquing sequence, especially with something that can move, I like to just draw a vertical line on it, and because it's a nice easy number like 90 degrees, that straight line will then become a horizontal line essentially. Just helps you keep a track of things a little bit easier as well, so you can see exactly which ones you have torqued and which ones you haven't. So yeah, here goes then. Let's do the 90 degrees. A little bit more. That's the beauty of marking the bolts, so you can see exactly how much you've done rather than relying on doing it in one sweep. Yeah, perfect. That's 1 done. As you can see then, all 6 flywheel bolts are now torqued down to 8 Newton meters, then 30 Newton meters, then a 90-degree rotation. Next then is of course the installation of the clutch itself. So again, we have a new Sachs clutch kit. The clutch disc itself, and of course the pressure plate. Again, just going to give the pressure plate a quick clean off. Make sure it doesn't have any oil on it. It's a good idea as well to have some kind of clutch alignment tool. Again, this is a custom made tool. My dad just turned this up out of a piece of aluminium, but it should make our life a little bit easier. Just to make sure that the clutch is going on central. It should have a flywheel side and then a gearbox side. It's obviously just the opposite side to the flywheel side. So just get the clutch disc on the clutch alignment tool, slot it into the crank. Now of course we can get our pressure plate, and then there is a couple of dowels on here, so you want to line them up. There we are, dowels are lined up. And we want to get our new bolts. Yes, you also have to replace the pressure plate bolts as well. And you take an E10 socket. And now these 6 M8 bolts can be torqued down to 23 Newton meters, again in a crisscross pattern. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now we can remove our clutch alignment tool. There we are. And now comes the fun task of lining up the gearbox to the engine. So then, as you can probably see, the gearbox is attached to the engine. Now, was it easy? No, definitely not. Definitely helps if you have 2 people though. So essentially what I'd done was had the engine up pretty high on the engine hoist, had the gearbox on the work table, and then I just physically lifted the gearbox into position while a second pair of hands just, you know, slid a couple of bolts in. Now I've just made that sound very, very simple. It's not going to be as simple as that. First and foremost, make sure the gearbox is out of gear so that you can turn the input shaft, because it's not going to just line up straight away with the clutch, so you are going to have to, you know, turn that to get it lined up with that clutch. But once the input shaft is lined up, then it's just a case of lining up the gearbox, lining up the bow housing bolts with the holes, of course, and just, you know, installing them all, tightening them down by hand, and then of course torquing them all up. Now you're probably wondering, what are the torque specs for the bow housing bolts? So there is a couple of different torque specs. You need to make sure you have the, you know, which bolts you have. So if you have M10 by 1.5mm thread pitch, which they are the bolts for my bow housing, they have to be torqued down to 38 Newton meters. So that's exactly what I have done. I believe if you have the M10 by 1.75 thread pitch, they have to be torqued down to like 55 Newton meters. And there is one for M12. I can't remember what that is, but again, it's more still. And then there is just 3 bolts that hold the starter motor to the gearbox. They have to be torqued down, all 3 of them, to 20 Newton meters. Installing this bracket, of course, I guess this has a couple of pipes off here, probably a vacuum pipe of some sort, I don't know, we'll see once it goes back into the car. But yeah, as you can see, we are now pretty much ready. Oh, I also installed the piece of silicone hose onto the vacuum nipple on the vacuum pump here, replacing this little bit. Like I said, this was way too loose on there and it just wanted to fall off, so it wouldn't have been any good. But yeah, a bit of silicone vacuum hose on there and it's all sitting nicely now. Okay then, so this will conclude the final part of the Mini Cooper S engine rebuild. The next video you'll see is getting this thing back in the car, attempting to fire it up. So do stay tuned for that. I hope you all have enjoyed yet another part in this series. If you have, please remember to give this video a like. But yeah, let's just summarize what we've gone over in this part. So of course we have pretty much finalized, you know, the engine. So we have installed the wiring loom. We've, you know, done a few little bits and pieces with regards to the vacuum hoses. We've got the clutch, flywheel, all that good stuff ready for the gearbox to go back on. And oh, we also pretty much reassembled the gearbox as well. Obviously, you know, installing a few seals, this gearbox mount, things like that. I also need to add some oil to this, which I will do once it's in the car, because it will be sitting perfectly level then. And yeah, I'll be able to get it up to the correct level. But yeah, I am excited. I cannot wait to get this thing in. It's been a hell of a lot of time. Like I said, a lot of money, a lot of effort, and yeah, it's been a good experience. So yeah, next video you will see, like I said, getting this thing back in the car, and just hoping and praying, I guess. But yeah, like I said, I hope you all have enjoyed this one anyway. Please give it a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe if you have not already done so, and I will see you all in that next one.